The 21st birthday gala for Caleb Thorne was a spectacle of old money and new power, held on the sprawling grounds of the family's Connecticut estate. Under a canopy of fairy lights, Caleb watched Leo, his eyes burning with a visceral, possessive light. He had noticed the way Leo had started hiding something fundamental about himself. Caleb cornered him in the quiet of the library, the scent of old paper and leather thick in the air. He wondered aloud how Leo had managed to conceal his true nature for so long. Slowly, deliberately, he began to unbuckle the heavy silver buckle of his belt, advancing on the younger man. He demanded to know why Leo had lied, why he had insisted for years that he had presented as an alpha. Caleb was not a man to be trifled with. He was the heir to the Thorne political dynasty. Leo was merely the son of the estate's groundskeeper. Yet on this night, Caleb's discovery that Leo was an Omega had ignited a dangerous, consuming fire in his gaze. He moved closer, asking again why Leo had deceived him. Leo clutched at his own trousers, his body trembling, trying to fend off the inevitable. He stammered that he was almost 19, that Caleb had no right to punish him like a child anymore. Caleb dismissed his pleas with a cold wave of his hand, stating that liars forfeited their right to negotiate. He ordered Leo to let go. Leo's eyes welled with tears, a familiar mix of fear and awe overwhelming him. He had always been both intimidated and mesmerized by Caleb, who was only a year his senior but seemed a lifetime ahead in power and confidence. His meager defenses crumbled. The final, sharp impacts left him breathless, a choked sob escaping his lips. He finally lashed out, his voice thick with tears, Caleb that he was a registered cadet now and that this assault would have consequences. He vowed retaliation in their next combat simulation, a fantasy of ramming Caleb's virtual warship into oblivion. Caleb only laughed, a low, menacing sound. He questioned the logic of Leo's defiant anger, reminding him of the immense danger he'd courted by faking his way into a military academy designed for alphas. Leo lifted his chin, stubbornly admitting to the lie but questioning if Caleb himself was entirely without fault. Caleb's expression shifted to one of intrigued cruelty. He leaned in, his face so close to Leo's neck that his warm breath ghosted over the sensitive skin where a gland lay hidden. He murmured a question about what possible wrong he could have committed, his voice a silken trap, wondering why Leo was so terrified of him knowing he was an Omega. A crimson flush crept up Leo's neck. The air was saturated with Caleb's dominant alpha scent, a heady mix of sandalwood and smoke that was both an enticement and a threat. It was suffocating. That Caleb could even ask such a question under these circumstances was maddening. But Leo lacked the courage to voice the truth hanging between them. His silence was broken when Caleb's lips descended, pressing a soft, proprietary kiss directly onto the gland. Caleb whispered that after so many years of secrets, a little mark from him shouldn't matter. This dynamic had been forged in their youth. Caleb had insisted they share everything, from meals to a bed, his body a constant, warm presence against Leo's. Any attempt by Leo to seek distance was met with swift, domineering correction. His to be good and stay still echoed in Leo's memory. At 12, Leo had gathered all his courage to ask for his own room, a request that earned him a humiliating punishment that silenced any future protests. He feared Caleb, but he also worshipped him. When Caleb presented as a top-tier alpha at 15, his behavior had only intensified, his pheromones a constant, oppressive cloud around Leo. Caleb had claimed he was helping, that constant exposure to a powerful alpha was the only way for Leo to achieve the alpha status he supposedly craved. It was a lie. Under that relentless pressure, Leo had presented as an Omega, hiding in a room filled with Caleb's scent. biting down on Caleb's discarded shirt to stifle his sobs. He had then faked his way into the academy. One night, when Caleb was drunk, he had pinned Leo against a wall, growling that being an alpha meant nothing. Leo would always be his. Now, at the height of the party, Caleb bit down, not hard enough for a permanent bond, but enough to leave a temporary mark. The scent of sandalwood flooded Leo's system, an irresistible and forceful invasion. Leo reacted instinctively, his hand striking Caleb's face with a sharp crack. His eyes blazed with unshed tears as he told Caleb he had always seen him as a brother and demanded he act like one. Caleb merely touched his jaw, a smirk playing on his lips. He reminded Leo that he hadn't been treated like a brother on the night Leo had stolen a kiss from him while he slept. A chill of panic shot through Leo, and he tried to flee, but Caleb slammed him against the wall again. He demanded to know why Leo would do that if he disliked him. The realization that Caleb had been awake that night struck Leo dumb. He denied everything, claiming ignorance. Silence descended upon the room. After a long moment, Caleb released him. He told Leo he would wait for him to figure things out, but warned him that his time was not unlimited. His gaze was heavy, filled with an unnerving certainty. When he finally left the library, Leo was drenched in the scent of sandalwood. The encounter had stopped short of the final act, yet a strange, hollow sense of disappointment echoed within him. He took a moment to compose himself before a notification lit up his phone. A message from a secure app asked if it was done. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs as he typed the reply that Caleb had not permanently bonded with him. There was no response. 3 days later, Leo slipped away to a sterile, minimalist apartment in Washington, D.C. The moment the door opened, he was hit by a wave of a different alpha's pheromones, a scent so potent it drove him to his knees. A man stepped out of the shadows, a wry smile playing on his lips. He questioned why Leo hadn't allowed the bonding to be completed. Julian Vance, Leo's supposed benefactor and a bitter political rival of the Thorne family, was the man who had orchestrated Leo's entire life. Years ago, he had taken a young, orphaned Leo and placed him within the Thorne household, a deep cover agent tasked with gaining Caleb's trust. The plan was simple: get Caleb to bond with him, create a scandal, and provide the leverage Julian needed to dismantle the Thorne dynasty and seize power. Leo lied again, claiming Caleb found him repulsive, that he was disgusted by omegas. Julian's gaze dropped to the faint mark on Leo's neck. He mused aloud that it was an odd way to show disgust. He told Leo the mark was a temporary claim, not a rejection. Leo insisted he had forced Caleb, that Caleb hated omegas. Julian laughed as if at a private joke, his fingers tapping Leo's cheek. He remarked on how transparent Leo became whenever he lied, him not to try and fool him. He reminded Leo gently that his mother and sister were still under his care. Leo turned his head away in defiance, which only seemed to amuse Julian more. He stated that he never engaged in unprofitable ventures and reminded Leo of who had saved his family from ruin. The mention of his ailing mother and young sister was a blade of shame in his gut. He turned back, his voice low and defeated, assuring his godfather that he would be good. To force Caleb's hand, Julian arranged for another cadet at the academy, a handsome alpha, to pursue Leo relentlessly. It was a public and obvious courtship. Julian called it a strategic retreat, a lesson in manipulation that he urged Leo to learn. He didn't know that Leo desperately wanted Caleb to hate him, to push him away, because that was the only way Caleb might be safe. So Leo played his part, allowing the rumors of his romance with the other alpha to spread like wildfire. He hadn't anticipated Caleb returning from his overseas deployment so soon. Caleb arrived just in time for their midterm combat simulations, his presence casting a chilling pall over the entire academy. He didn't even glance at Leo, announcing coldly to the supervising officers that he would be serving as the guest proctor. Leo knew he was in trouble. The other cadets were terrified of this living legend, this stone-cold warrior. Once inside the command simulator, the first name Caleb called belonged to the alpha who had been courting Leo. The simulated battlefield erupted with the sound of massive collisions. It wasn't a drill. It was a slaughter. The other cadet's pristine white mech was tossed about like a rabbit in a wolf's jaws, utterly defenseless against the onslaught of Caleb's silver machine. It was systematically dismantled, torn apart until the Academy's dean had to intervene and halt the simulation. The alpha scrambled from the wreckage, pale and trembling. Caleb emerged from his own machine, his long legs carrying him onto the platform. He declared the cadet's performance unsatisfactory and ordered him to repeat the course. That was unmistakable. Stay away from what is mine. Then his icy gaze finally fell upon Leo. He called his name. Leo's earlier bravado about destroying Caleb's warship evaporated, replaced by the conditioned fear of a lifetime. His brother was here to punish him. He slowly climbed into his simulator, but before the cockpit door could seal, a long, elegant hand shot through the gap. Leo's heart leaped into his throat as Caleb swung himself inside. Before Leo could ask what he was doing, Caleb's powerful frame pressed him back against the seat, and his lips came crashing down. Leo struggled, pleading with him to stop, reminding him that the simulation was being monitored, that everyone could be watching. Caleb was kissing him, forcing himself on him, and he seemed not to care. Leo bit Caleb's lip, drawing blood, but it didn't deter him. The assault continued until the simulator's pheromone detector shrieked a red alert. Caleb finally pulled back, a faint smile on his lips as he asked if Leo was scared. Panting, Leo begged him to let him take the test. Caleb scoffed, questioning the point of a test when Leo had been so busy entertaining other alphas. Leo's face burned with shame. Caleb's voice dropped, laced with menace, as he reminded Leo that he had facilitated his education at an alpha academy and kept his Omega secret safe, not so he could engage in cheap romances. Leo understood he promised to break it off. That day, Caleb's mood remained thunderous. Back at the estate, he made Leo kneel on the bed and delivered 20 sharp swats, hissing that if he'd known this would happen, he would have left the cameras on so everyone would know who Leo belonged to. Leo buried his face in a pillow, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his face. Caleb leaned over him, his voice softening slightly as he whispered that once Leo finally agreed, he left the sentence unfinished, but Leo knew exactly what he meant. Julian's plan had worked perhaps too well. The story of the decorated war hero and son of a prominent senator returning to West Point to personally oversee an exam, seemingly for the sake of one specific cadet, became a hot topic for the media. Everyone now knew Caleb Thorne was interested in another alpha. When Senator Marcus Thorne confronted his son, it was with a vicious backhand across the face. He called Caleb a disgrace. Caleb was subjected to the family's brutal form of discipline while Marcus forced Leo to watch. Marcus raged, questioning how Caleb could lose control over some low-status alpha, asking if he had forgotten his duty as the Thorne heir. He was profoundly disappointed. A heavy riding crop fell again and again, 50 times, until Caleb's bones were bruised and blood trickled from his lips. Marcus threatened him to accept the arranged political marriage, or the Thorne family would have no place for him. Leo watched in horror, knowing Marcus Thorne was a ruthless man who had clawed his way to power and would not hesitate to destroy anyone, even his own son. Caleb wiped the blood from his mouth and laughed, a hollow, defiant sound. He asked if his father wanted him to marry someone he didn't love, to end up like him, losing the woman he loved and living a hollow life. The barb struck home. Caleb's mother had been driven to her death by Marcus's controlling nature, never loving the man she was forced to marry. Marcus's final act of violence was a slap across Leo's face. He warned Caleb that if he didn't comply, he would never see Leo again. The fight went out of Caleb instantly. He looked at Leo, then back at his father and surrendered, his head bowed. That night, Caleb's fever spiked. His chaotic alpha pheromones repelled everyone, but Leo was able to enter his room. Caleb weakly raised a hand, telling Leo not to cry, that he was fine. He tried to emit a calming scent to soothe Leo's distress. Leo just choked on his tears, unable to speak. Caleb gave a bitter smile, confessing his deep-seated hatred for his father, blaming him for his mother's death and his subsequent promiscuity that had littered the country with illegitimate children. And now Marcus stood in the way of their happiness. Leo's heart seized as he saw a flicker of murderous intent in Caleb's eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a soft, almost desperate tenderness. He proposed they have a child together, a move that would force everyone's hand. Leo was terrified. He reminded Caleb that he had promised not to force him. Caleb's throat worked as he soothed him, claiming he was only joking. But Leo knew he was serious. The thought had taken root. In the weeks that followed, as Caleb navigated the political minefield his father had laid, attending meetings with potential fiancés, he also confiscated every pheromone suppressant in the house. After Leo's 20th birthday, he knew Caleb stood outside his locked bedroom door for a long time. He could have broken it down, but instead he spoke just loudly enough for Leo to hear. He wished Leo a happy birthday. It was a message: you cannot escape. Caleb was being pushed to his limit, caught between placating the old tyrant and returning home each night to hold Leo in his arms, whispering promises that soon Marcus would retire, he would take control, and no one would ever separate them again. He just needed Leo to wait. Leo's panic grew. Julian was pressuring him to finalize the plan, insisting this was the perfect moment to strike. He remained indecisive until a phone call shattered his world. It was his mother. She told him she missed him. Tears welled in Leo's eyes. He had been taken into the Thorne household as a child and rarely saw his own family, communicating only through brief, supervised video calls on Julian's devices. This time, her voice was trembling. She asked him if it was true if what Mr. Vance had told her was true, that he was working for the Thorne family. Before Leo could answer, she broke down, sobbing. She asked how he could do such a thing, reminding him that Marcus Thorne was the man who had murdered his father. Leo froze. His mother recounted the story of how his father, a rising political aide, had stood in the way of Marcus Thorne's ambition. Marcus had arranged an accident, a fiery explosion that had killed his father and his entire staff. Only Leo's pregnant mother and a very young Leo had survived, spirited away moments before the blast by Julian's men. He was his father's killer. The entire Thorne family was poison. She implored him to avenge his father. Leo's body went numb, the phone slipping from his grasp. Caleb was the son of his father's murderer. His purpose had always been revenge, to bring ruin to this family. It was all so simple, so clear. So why did his heart ache with such unbearable pain? A new message arrived from Julian. It was the final. He told Leo to think of his mother, to consider the life she deserved. Brother or mother, love or vengeance. On the first night of his heat cycle after his 20th birthday, Leo made his choice. He went to Caleb's bed. When Caleb opened his bedroom door, the sweet, intoxicating scent of citrus and rain hit him like a physical blow. It was the scent of an omega in full heat, ripe and ready. Leo stood there, a towel wrapped loosely around his waist, his voice a nervous whisper as he said Caleb's name. Caleb's eyes lit up, his throat working as he stared at Leo like a predator who had just cornered his prey. He asked if this was what he thought it was. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his own scent of sandalwood and smoke filling the space as he pressed Leo back against the door. He asked why Leo hadn't taken his suppressants. Leo's face was scarlet as he confessed it was because he was waiting for Caleb to come home. That was all it took. Caleb's control shattered. His kiss was desperate, consuming. He warned Leo not to regret this. The night stretched on until the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. In a daze, Leo watched Caleb's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated joy. Sweat dripped from Caleb's brow onto his chest as he chanted Leo's name over and over. A permanent mark, a stylized design of interwoven sandalwood branches, now bloomed on the back of Leo's neck. He asked Caleb when he had started to love him. Caleb lit a cigarette, his face half hidden in the smoke. He said it had been a long, long time. He asked if Leo remembered the time his father had beaten him and locked him in the cellar for 3 days. Leo remembered. Caleb had been 8, Leo only 7. Marcus had forbidden anyone from giving Caleb food or water. After 3 days, Caleb was starving and filled with a burning hatred. No one had dared to defy the senator except for Leo. He had snuck down with a small bowl of oatmeal and turned on the single bare bulb, chasing away the darkness. When Marcus found out, he had locked Leo in with him. Leo had been terrified of the dark, so he'd clung to Caleb all night, telling him not to be afraid, even though he was the one shaking. Caleb let out a soft laugh, lost in the memory. At first, he had hated Leo, calling him a skinny, dark-haired little monkey and telling him to get out of his house. But after that night in the cellar, something had shifted. Over the years, that acceptance had grown into a secret, all-consuming love. He cupped Leo's face, his expression deadly serious, and declared his love, asking if Leo loved him in return. The intensity in his eyes was terrifying. Leo couldn't answer. He burrowed under the covers, unable to tell him the truth, that he was there to destroy him, to avenge a ghost. Caleb's face fell. He murmured that it didn't matter, that Leo was his omega now, and he wasn't going anywhere. Once Caleb was asleep, Leo quietly slipped out of bed. He sent a message to Julian from a burner phone. Caleb has bonded with me. Julian's reply was swift. Good. You can come back now. After Leo vanished from the Thorn estate, Julian began his campaign. He leaked the story that Caleb Thorn, the decorated war hero and political heir, was in a relationship with another alpha. An AA relationship was a taboo, a source of public shame and disgust. Then, an anonymous source released the simulator footage of Caleb brutalizing the other cadet. That same cadet held a press conference, tearfully accusing Caleb of using his power to steal his lover. At first, the public was skeptical. But then, photos surfaced of the sandalwood mark on Leo's neck, next to his Alpha Military Academy insignia. The evidence was damning. The nation erupted. Caleb was branded a predator, an abuser of power who had stolen another man's love. While the court of public opinion convicted Caleb, Julian moved on the political front. He compiled a dossier of Marcus Thorn's crimes over the years and delivered it, through a third party, to the Senate Ethics Committee. Within a month, the Thorn family, once untouchable, was under federal investigation. Caleb's phone was a constant barrage of messages to Leo, a string of frantic texts that eventually devolved into two simple, heartbreaking questions. Where are you? You don't want me anymore, do you? Please come back. His tone was pleading, desperate. Leo never replied. One day, the messages stopped. He saw Caleb on the news, surrounded by a mob of reporters. A journalist asked if it was true his lover was a commoner. Another asked why he would violate social norms by pursuing another alpha, questioning if he understood the damage this would do to his political future. The election was imminent. Without this scandal, Caleb was a shoo-in for a junior cabinet position. All he had to do was tell the truth, to reveal that Leo was an Omega. The scandal would vanish. Leo would be arrested and imprisoned for fraud, his decade of hard work destroyed, but Caleb would be saved. He didn't. He looked directly into the camera and spoke, his voice clear and steady. My partner is not a commoner. And whether he is an alpha, a beta, or an omega, I will love him. And I will find him. That last part was for Leo. A shiver ran down his spine, a sudden, terrifying certainty that he would never truly escape this man. A voice from behind him asked if his heart was aching. Julian had been in an excellent mood lately. Every move, from the childhood oatmeal to the final betrayal, had been part of his intricate design. He was a master of manipulating human hearts. Leo asked if he was satisfied. Julian smiled, wiping a tear from Leo's eye, questioning why he no longer called him Godfather. He cooed that losing a brother shouldn't be so upsetting, offering to be his family now. Leo shuddered, not understanding. Julian's smile never faltered. He told him not to be afraid, that this was only the beginning. On election day, Julian took Leo onto a yacht, a gilded cage floating in the Atlantic. He had Leo's phone and forced a video call to Caleb. The connection was immediate. Caleb, dressed in a sharp suit on his way to the party headquarters, saw Leo's face and instantly understood he was a hostage, his mouth bound with tape. Caleb's voice, usually so steady, trembled as he promised to find him, to send people to his location. Leo shook his head wildly, trying to warn him away. Caleb hung up. He knew it was a trap, but he was coming anyway. An eternity seemed to pass. Leo awoke from a drugged haze to the sound of Caleb's voice, whispering his name. He opened his eyes to the sight of Caleb's jaw, his strong arms holding him as if he were a lost treasure. He promised to take him home. A warm, salty tear fell onto Leo's cheek. Before Caleb could untie him, a single, sharp crack echoed across the water. A bullet tore through Caleb's chest, spraying a line of blood across Leo's face. He watched, uncomprehending, as Caleb's body fell backward into the black, churning sea. His mind shut down. He had never imagined Julian would go this far. The world spun and he fell into darkness. When he next saw Julian, he slapped him, his voice a raw scream as he accused him of murder. Julian's eyes widened slightly. He remarked that Leo was the first person to ever strike him. He denied ordering the hit, claiming he had only sent the message about the kidnapping. He mused on Caleb's foolishness, rushing from his own election victory into a blatant trap, questioning the intelligence of the Thorn heir. But that was Caleb. Even a 1% chance of Leo being in danger was enough for him to risk everything. Leo closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face, his mind racing. Julian was not a man who shied away from taking CR for his actions. If not him, then who? Julian, now the newly appointed Secretary of State, tried to comfort him, a fox feigning sympathy. He pointed out that, with the Thorn family dismantled and Marcus sentenced to death, he had avenged Leo's father. He told Leo he should be grateful. The smile froze on Julian's face as he felt the point of a knife press against his chest. Leo warned him that if he stayed, only one of them would walk away. Julian grabbed the blade, his own hand bleeding, and sighed. He lamented that Leo had grown up, that he could no longer keep him. 2 years later, Leo had graduated from the academy. His mother, her health restored, ran a small flower shop. Julian had tried to contact him countless times, but Leo refused all communication. One day, he showed up in person. He pulled Leo into an embrace, his alpha scent cloying and unwelcome. Leo told him to release his pheromones. Julian held him tighter, asking if he was going to reject him forever for a dead man. He whispered in Leo's ear, asking what he was missing that Caleb had. He reminded Leo that without his intervention, Leo would have nothing. Leo closed his eyes. He told Julian that if he had ever truly loved him, he would never have sent him to the thorns, never have pushed him into Caleb's bed. He called him a hypocrite. Julian stiffened and released him. He asked if Leo had hated him all this time. Leo shook his head. He was grateful for the rescue, but that was all he could give. He told Julian he didn't understand love. Julian's carefully constructed composure shattered. He vowed that he would never let Leo go, his voice dangerously soft as he said he didn't want to treat him like a pet and lock him away. The man was becoming unhinged, his patience worn thin, his eyes holding a new, predatory gleam. Leo pretended to acquiesce while secretly planning his escape. Then, a letter arrived. It was an invitation to try out for the Praetorians, the most elite special operations unit in the country. It was the dream of every soldier, a near-impossible goal, and it had landed in his lap like a miracle. He packed his bags immediately. Before he left, his mother stopped him, her face etched with worry. She questioned his decision to join such a dangerous unit, especially as an Omega. She also asked why he couldn't see how good Julian was to them, paying for her medical bills, his sister's education, loving him for so many years. She called him a powerful man, asking what more he could want. Leo cut her off, recognizing Julian's manipulative words. After Caleb's fall into the ocean, his own heart had gone cold. He felt like a ghost. This letter was the first sign of life he'd felt in years. He traveled 1,000 miles to the remote training facility. The first person he saw, the person who turned to face him, was a ghost himself. It was Caleb. The name left his lips in a choked whisper. Caleb was alive. Leo moved toward him, his vision blurring with tears, his hand outstretched to touch his face. Caleb took a step back, his expression one of pure scorn. He asked who Leo thought he was, informing him that he was the commanding officer here. Leo froze. At that same moment, he caught Caleb's scent. The familiar sandalwood was there, but it was tainted, interwoven with the scent of another Omega. Caleb had washed his bond mark, and he had marked someone else. The pain was a physical blow, so sharp he could barely breathe. He pleaded, telling Caleb how much he'd missed him. Caleb looked at him with disgust and shoved him away. He warned Leo that if he didn't pull himself together, he could go home without even attempting the selection course. It was him. Leo hadn't even told the recruiters his name, but Caleb knew, and he refused to acknowledge him. The selection process was torture. Caleb was harder on him than anyone else, loading his pack with an extra 20 pounds for the 20-mile run. Leo's legs gave out, and he collapsed in the mud. Caleb kicked him hard in the back, ordering him to get up or get out. Leo spat out a mouthful of dirt and staggered to his feet, not missing the single word Caleb muttered under his breath. Useless. He wanted to cry. The Caleb he knew would never have been so cruel. During combat drills, Caleb used live-fire simulation rounds against him, his eyes filled with an uncomplicated hatred. Every time their eyes met, Leo wanted to ask him if he still loved him, if he had thought of him at all over the past 2 years. But when a simulated bullet struck him square in the chest, he knew the answer. His brother didn't love him anymore. The old Caleb would never have hurt him anywhere but his backside. This Caleb broke his arm, dislocated his shoulder, and ground his face into the dirt. He hated him. The most common thing he said was that if Leo couldn't handle it, he should run home. He knew Leo was an Omega, and yet he pushed him the hardest. One day, at his breaking point, Leo grabbed Caleb's hand, his eyes red and swollen from crying, and begged him to stop, to just talk to him. Caleb emotionlessly wiped the tears from Leo's face. He told him his brother wasn't there, that his tears were useless. He said a failure like Leo had no right to be on a battlefield and ordered him back to his barracks. On the way, the platoon sergeant informed him that he'd been granted a 3-day leave. The timing coincided perfectly with his heat cycle. He had never requested it. He didn't give up. When his heat began, he didn't use his suppressants. That night, he snuck into Caleb's private quarters. A voice demanded to know who was there. As Caleb switched on a lamp, Leo launched himself at him, tackling him onto the bed. The room filled with the scent of citrus and rain. He whimpered that it was him, that his cycle had started, that Caleb must have been the one who approved his leave. He begged Caleb not to push him away. Caleb laughed, a cold, bitter sound. He asked if Leo really thought he still kept track of his cycles, calling him pathetically self-absorbed. He sneered, asking if this was how he behaved, crawling into an alpha's room during his heat. Was this how he had been taught? Leo froze, the insult cutting deeper than any physical blow. Caleb's hand closed around his marked gland, toying with it callously. He asked if Leo thought he would fall for his tricks again, after being deceived for more than a decade. He asked if Leo had a heart. He spat out questions about Julian, asking if Leo had come running back to him now that his other alpha was done with him. He was no longer pretending not to know him. He shoved Leo brutally to the floor. He accused Leo of being disgusted while they were together, of playing him like a dog just to get revenge on his father. He demanded to know if, after all those years, Leo had ever loved him at all. His eyes were red with pain. Leo's own heart was being shredded. He wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that he loved him, but every word Caleb spoke was a reflection of the damage he had actually caused. Caleb would never believe him again. To stay was to invite more humiliation. As he tried to get up, Caleb grabbed his ankle and dragged him back. He snarled, asking who gave him permission to leave, asking which alpha he was planning to seduce next with his scent. He asked how many alpha's beds he'd been in over the last 2 years. He bit down hard on Leo's gland, a fresh wave of sandalwood flooding his system, soothing the urgent burn of his heat. A hot tear fell from Caleb's eye onto Leo's neck. He growled that the day Leo had played him for a fool was the day he should have known he would never be let go. The union that followed was agony. It must have been worse for Caleb, marking an Omega when he was already bonded to another. The clash of scents nearly drove him mad. He slapped Leo, muffling his mouth when he tried to cry out his name. They tormented each other for 3 days and 3 nights until Leo's cycle passed, leaving him with a raging fever. In a delirious haze, he grabbed Caleb's hand and asked if he really had another Omega. Caleb pulled his hand away. His voice was flat and dead as he confirmed that he did. He didn't want Leo anymore. It was revenge. Caleb would visit him in the infirmary reeking of another Omega's scent. He would flirt with this supposed new partner on the phone right in front of Leo. He asked if Leo had any right to cry, reminding him of his godfather. He taunted him, asking if Julian even bothered with him anymore, saying that besides him, no one would ever want Leo. He broke him down, calling him an unwanted child that Julian had only used, telling him that the Praetorians were his only option because he had nowhere else to go. The constant psychological assault worsened his fever until Caleb finally fell silent. At night, he would hold Leo, claiming it was to make him sweat out the fever, but the embrace was a suffocating torment. One night, through the fog of his illness, he heard familiar voices arguing. It was Julian. He was taunting Caleb, asking how he dared to show his face, saying he'd wanted to deal with him for a long time. Then Julian's mocking laugh. He was there to take Leo home, since Caleb clearly didn't want him anymore. The sound of fists hitting flesh followed. Terrified, Leo stumbled out of bed to intervene. The two top-tier alphas were locked in a brutal fight, their pheromones so overpowering that they had cleared 3 floors of the hospital. They were fighting to kill. Julian spat out a mouthful of blood and provoked Caleb further, asking if he really thought they had a future, mentioning the scent of the other Omega on him, saying Leo disliked anything dirty. Caleb responded with a vicious kick. He snarled that nothing was as dirty as the Secretary of State's methods. He yelled that he had raised Leo, that their business was none of Julian's concern. They fell on each other again like wild animals. Julian, enraged, shouted that when a child he cared for was hurt, he had to step in. He yelled that Caleb knew the shooting 2 years ago had nothing to do with Leo, that it was one of Marcus's illegitimate sons who had arranged it, and that Caleb would have missed the election anyway. The Thorn dynasty was already rotten to the core. Julian screamed that he thought Caleb had given Leo the Praetorian invitation to cherish him, not to torture him, offering to take care of Leo himself. Caleb didn't answer, simply absorbing 2 more heavy blows. Leo was stunned. For 2 years, a mountain of guilt had been crushing him. Now that weight was lifted. He had never owed Caleb a life. He hadn't been the one to nearly get him killed. He slipped back to his room and hid under the covers. A while later, both men entered, bruised and bleeding. Julian told Leo it was time to go home with him, that this broken unit wasn't for him. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, his face a swollen mask, saying nothing, but watching Leo's reaction like a cornered wolf, ready to pounce if he agreed to leave. Leo lowered his gaze. He told Julian to go, that he wasn't going back. In his heart, wherever Caleb was, that was his home. After Julian left, Caleb never again carried the scent of another Omega. He cared for Leo in silence until he was almost recovered. Then he told him that once he was well, he should go back home. Leo stared at him. He was sending him away. He refused, reminding Caleb that this was his lifelong dream. Caleb's face hardened. He said this wasn't a game. An Omega whose heat cycle sent him to the infirmary with a fever had no place on a mission. He would fail him on the final assessment. Leo's eyes filled with tears. He asked why Caleb had sent him the invitation in the first place, knowing no one else knew how much he wanted this. He threw himself into Caleb's arms, begging him not to abandon him, sobbing that he truly had no other home. Caleb's resolve finally broke. He allowed Leo to pass the assessment and officially become a member of the Praetorians. No one could have predicted how difficult their first mission would be. Caleb was always in front of Leo, shielding him. He told Leo he could handle himself. Caleb just barked at him to get behind him. It was an order. Amidst the blinding snow and punishing 15,000-foot altitude, the exhausted team missed the signs. But Leo, with his heightened Omega senses, caught the faint trace of a foreign alpha's scent. He screamed for Caleb to be careful. As the muzzle flash of an M200 sniper rifle lit up the mountainside, Leo threw himself at Caleb. Memories flashed before his eyes. The night of their first real intimacy, Caleb's earnest voice asking him if he loved him. "I love you, Caleb." He mouthed the words. The bullet hitting his body was a dull, painless thud. The real pain, a soul-deep agony, came later, as Caleb held him, screaming his name. After their reunion, Caleb had never dared to believe he loved him. This stubborn alpha had convinced himself they were beyond repair. Leo knew he should have said it sooner. He whispered that he had loved him for so long, but he had been a coward. The mission cost them 3 teammates, but because Leo had identified the sniper's position, the Praetorians completed an impossible task. Months later, the story of his heroism, combined with the political push from Julian Vance, led to the repeal of the Omega Exclusion Act, allowing Omegas to attend military academies and serve openly. Leo watched from his hospital bed as Julian stormed into the room, his face a thundercloud. He accused Caleb of failing to protect him. Caleb ignored him, turning to Leo, who had only been awake for 3 days. He told him to ignore Julian, promising that nothing like this would ever happen again. He positioned himself to block Julian from Leo's view. Leo frowned and told Caleb his scent was unpleasant. Caleb froze, then understood. He quickly explained that the other Omega scent was a synthetic compound. After he was fished out of the ocean, gravely injured, the doctors feared he wouldn't survive his next heat cycle without a bonded partner. They had performed a risky procedure to wash the bond mark and had used the synthetic pheromones to stabilize him. The other Omega had been an actor, hired to make Leo jealous. Caleb admitted it was childish. He leaned down and kissed Leo's forehead, asking if they could rebond properly once he was healed. He was saying it for Julian's benefit. Leo pouted, reminding Caleb how much he had hurt him, how he had hit him and insulted him. Caleb looked ready to kneel. He admitted he was wrong, that he had regretted his cruelty from the first day Leo arrived. The unit was too dangerous. He had wanted to scare him into going home, but he couldn't bear the thought of not seeing him every day. He begged for forgiveness. Leo grumbled that he had been very convincing in his role. Buried in Caleb's embrace, he mumbled that he would have to think about the rebonding. Caleb, caught in his own trap, stiffened, managing only a tight agreement. He turned his frustration on the remaining audience member, asking Julian why he was still there, if the Secretary of State had nothing better to do than watch them. Julian's lips twisted into a cold smile. He said one word, deserved. He and Caleb started arguing again. As he finally left, Julian told Leo that if he was ever mistreated, he could always come home, that he would be waiting. Caleb slammed the door behind him. He turned back to Leo, his expression wounded, and asked if Leo really still had feelings for him. Leo smiled. He told Caleb of course not, that it had only ever been him. For a very long time, in his heart, they had already sealed their vows. On the day of their wedding, the acceptance of AA relationships was growing. At the reception, no one cared if Leo was an Omega or an Alpha. He was simply Caleb Thorne's spouse. Julian Vance was in attendance, his face a dark mask. During the toasts, Caleb deliberately provoked him, raising his glass and calling him Godfather. He thanked him for sending Leo to the Thorne estate all those years ago, without which he never would have found such a wonderful husband. The usually unflappable Secretary of State nearly threw his champagne in Caleb's face. He regained his composure, saying the title was unnecessary, but warned Caleb that if Leo was ever hurt, he would hold him responsible. Caleb just smiled. He remarked that the secretary was so young at heart, still competing with men half his age. Julian, who had just turned 38, clenched his jaw and drank the champagne. The tension was so thick that the other guests fell silent, sensing the animosity between the general and the statesman. Leo sighed and took Caleb's arm, suggesting they go take pictures. Caleb's hand closed over his voice full of affection as he agreed. The camera shutter clicked, capturing the two of them in a perfect, happy, white frame. It was a picture of a century of happiness, of a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of gardens.